The way we design, build, and operate buildings is undergoing a radical transformation. Welcome to ACE IoT Flight Logs. I'm Andrew Rogers, co-founder of ACE IoT Solutions, and I've spent years immersed in the world of smart building technology. Join me as I learn from the industry's leading innovators, researchers, engineers, technicians, and more, how we can revolutionize the entire life cycle of the built environment. Get ready to take flight and explore the future of how buildings are delivered and operated. Hey folks, Andrew Rogers here again for another conversation with a leader from the smart buildings technology space. Got Leslie Beu here from Long Building Technologies. Really excited to have Leslie take some time out to talk to us a little bit. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi, thank you.
Just to get started, I think probably a lot of people do know who you are. You've been around a little bit, I think been on some other podcasts, you've spoke at some conferences, but for those viewers who maybe aren't as familiar with you and Long Building Technology, you just start with a little bit about you, how you got in the industry and what you do with Long.
Yeah, I started at Long as an energy engineer, but it quickly evolved into an analytics and energy manager position because we recognized that in order to scale all the new performance-based and impact-driven service, as we call it, we needed to get a base level of new processes, new understanding of the fault detection and diagnostics platform that we work with. And so I hired a couple other energy engineers and a statistician and have been working alongside a lot of the technicians and the salespeople to kind of develop this almost this startup business within Long's overall organization. And that touches Long in Colorado as well as Long in all of our states as far as Alaska. And so I'm leading the conversations with our partner at Clockworks for this analytics platform, as well as then internally training our workforce how to use this platform and how my engineers and then the technicians in our service and construction group can then interface with us.
Awesome. I guess just a little brief background. Leslie and I were both at a conference recently, NexusCon, out in Denver. And I realized I wanted to talk more to Leslie when we were sort of bonded over a group table discussion about workforce and shared some of our critiques, I would say, constructive critiques of sort of the discourse around workforce in our industry and how maybe like trying to do more of the same harder is not going to get us where we want to go. So that's a little bit about why we're here, learning a little bit more about Leslie. Like, I think her background's really fascinating, and the path of coming up instead of just being in controls or just being a mechanical engineer and MEP, but coming up through that sort of focus on controls and the actual operation technology in the building, but with the energy efficiency focus. I've talked to a few folks I think who've had a similar path, and those people are all really, really effective, but I don't feel like as an industry we're training a whole lot of people intentionally to fill that role that have that sort of broad spectrum background with the efficiency, the what it takes to measure and validate the efficiency and actually implement it. So I was really excited to have Leslie. I guess just to set the tone here, like, we're a software company. My workforce problems are different than a lot of the other parts of the industry, but I'm very interested in the broader industry workforce issues. I'm also not at a huge company, so I know like Long is a lot larger company than ACE IoT, and you're leading a pretty good group there. So from your perspective, I guess we're talking about smart buildings, which is really, really broad, but like from your perspective, what is this industry we're talking about, and what are some of the roles that as someone trying to keep a team going, you're looking to fill or have been looking to fill over the last few years?
It's definitely the topic at hand. I was just at a kind of a working session with the city of Denver and some of their decarbonization efforts. And we talked a lot about this as well. Right now, the smart buildings industry is either completely looked at as HVAC install, building design, or some people do recognize, obviously, that we've got a lot of facility engineers and operators and service providers that are also part of this industry, if you will, this HVAC industry. And in order to continue to save energy, decarbonize, and frankly, my passion is improving comfort and improving longevity of the equipment. You can't really have one without the other with energy efficiency. So now that industry has changed a little bit, it's still using a lot of those core people from the design, install, and then ongoing operations and maintenance. But now we're using data, we're using analytics type programs, and we're using all the smart sensors and capabilities of the systems themselves. And so the workforce, while it's still hard to find and replace a retiring workforce, we're also recognizing that we can't only have traditional roles and traditional role sets. And what I'm finding is that I really need some sort of combination of people. What I mean by that is I could take an energy engineer or a mechanical engineer, and they might know a lot about designing a new building. But frankly, a lot of design engineers don't really know controls, or they don't know how to truly get into the system and what the programming logic really does in order to truly optimize the existing equipment without having to just replace it with brand new, hopefully more efficient equipment. If we don't run it better, we're not going to get all the energy savings that are on the table. So I'm really combining technician skill sets and engineering skill sets, and I'm trying to bring them together. And that's hard, but it's worth it. And we're learning so much from each other in our organization so that we can be better and more valuable for our clients.
Like I said, I think you represent a kind of unicorn, not the only person I interact with. It's always a pleasure when you getting pulled into a project, and we work with a lot of really well-meaning mechanical engineers who just don't go the depth. And so when you run into someone who you're like start talking about a challenge and they don't get a blank stare and they can kind of discuss it with you and talk about how the best way to resolve it, I think we definitely need more of those folks in the industry. Where do you see those people coming from? Like, are you finding them and upskilling them in house? Are is it better to start with a technician or is it better to start with an engineer? Like, what are you finding?
Yeah, good question. I'm not finding a lot out there, right? Like you said, like maybe there's quite a few, a handful of unicorns, if you will. I truly believe we can train more and build more unicorns, but it takes an effort of cross training. It takes willingness and curiosity on the part of either a technician or an engineer. If I have an engineer who says, I got my degree, I want to make all this money and I want to sit behind a desk and just design, that's not that useful to me in what I'm doing. And if I have a technician who says, I just want to go work with my hands and I just want to go fix the problem that's out there, and I don't want to learn the engineering capabilities behind it, then that's also a challenge as we move forward in the smart buildings industry. But if we can get people that are intellectually curious, who are wanting and eager to challenge themselves and learn more, like some of the engineers and the technicians that we have who are diving headfirst into kind of an uncomfortable area because you come with all this experience and expertise, and then you realize, I don't know half the stuff. And that's a really hard place to be.
Yeah.
It's challenging and it shouldn't feel threatening. Sometimes it does, sometimes it's really uncomfortable for people. But when it comes together, we're building those unicorns. We have a workforce that's learning those skill sets, learning what fault detection and diagnostics is really looking at, learning how the systems work, and then engineers who are learning what actually goes into controlling a piece of equipment or a system better.
I think this is something, the reason, another reason why I was excited to talk to you about this is that in my observation, I have a little bit of a background in commissioning. And, you know, at the time, I was frustrated by the lack of understanding from the design engineers on how things actually worked in the field. And then having to, like, as a commissioning engineer, you spend a lot of time translating between the final owner, the facility owner who's going to have to manage this thing, and a sequence of operations described on a plan, and then what a controls contractor actually did.
Yeah.
Sometimes those are three completely different things, what the client wants, what the controls contractor did, what the design
Yeah.
engineer specified. They can be completely different. I actually have a friend who runs a commissioning engineering firm, or ran a commissioning engineering firm, and transitioned into design because his clients kept kind of coming back to him and saying, hey, if you're going to have to redo all this, like, why aren't you just doing it up front for us? And I don't know how we solve that challenge, because on the academic side, teaching a mechanical engineering degree, there's so much theory they have to get squashed into that 4 years, that and universities historically, and we can argue whether it's appropriately, I would say probably appropriately, but maybe there's adjustments that need to be made, aren't workforce development programs, right? They teach you critical thinking skills, the engineering fundamentals, the theory, and maybe it is really just down to how the job market has transitioned, and people are just throwing junior engineers into the mix and stamping out plans and not getting that field work that maybe 30 or 50 or 100 years ago they were pre HVAC maybe, but mechanical engineers nonetheless. They were spending time in apprenticeships after school. There was all this kind of more on the job training, and it does feel like, as an industry, as a society, trying to meet carbon goals, trying to reach efficiency, like, we've got to have people who understand how these things actually work.
Yeah, I think we need to tap into more people in junior high and high school before they're even making the decisions about college or trade school. And we have to get away from thinking trade school is an alternative. We have to start thinking about how we can have a workforce that can be trained on the job or with trade schools in conjunction with apprenticeship programs. And if people realize, A, the money that they can make in this industry, B, the flexible hours that you could get in this industry, and the job demand, and the honestly, how exciting it is to solve these problems. If we could look at high schoolers, even middle schoolers, and start talking about, hey, you like to go to an escape room, you like building Legos, you like solving puzzles, you're really good at troubleshooting, most of the time, those kids are also good at math and science, and people say, go be an engineer. And that's fine. You know, some kids are really excited to be an engineer, but I think that you can train people to do this kind of work just as effectively. I've had so many people that I've worked with in the past without degrees that have the engineering mindset, the curiosity. Many of those people are technicians. Some of them kind of got into the industry later on in life and fell in love with it. But people don't even, they're not even really aware that they could do that or how satisfying these jobs in this industry can be. But in order to get there, we have to have companies and organizations willing to train and willing to have apprenticeship programs. And Long is doing that. We have apprenticeship programs. I've hired people that didn't know the full job right away, but have the capability, the skill set to learn it and the curiosity to get there.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is to get this workforce we need, we're going to have to be willing to invest. And like you said, the people have to be willing to invest as well. Like, you have to be willing to tackle something that is not comfortable, maybe because you're not good at it at first. There's just so much to know. Yeah, we were just talking to another friend of mine in the industry a few weeks ago, and she was kind of sharing her story. In fact, you can find it, previous episode, about being a female engineer going through a mechanical engineering program. And she did do it. She did it as like a, this is what I should be doing because I'm good at math, because I'm good at physics. But she wasn't excited about any of the things that were being shown to her as paths for mechanical engineering. And we were just talking a little bit about the curriculum, and like, the curriculum is all oriented around, in her school, I think it varies with each school, but like, her school is all automotive engineering. Like, that's what they were, it was Carnot cycle. That's what they were digging deep into. And she was like, I don't care about cars or combustion engines. I want, I want to save the world. She wanted to work in energy efficiency. She wanted to work in sustainability. And so I think there's some adaptation that needs to happen in the curriculum. And then obviously, I think what we're talking about today is just other paths. Like, you don't have to go do that. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for someone to spend 4 years learning about internal combustion engines to then, work on, integrating solar and battery storage systems to HVAC controls. Like, those are two different worlds. And I'm sure there's PE boards everywhere who are like, no, you need to know it all, but I disagree. And I think, like, potentially the challenge is, as our engineering world gets broader, like, we need to subdivide more again because it's just too much.
If I could just add, I have an employee, and he and I were talking yesterday actually about these kind of issues, and he had this great analogy about mechanics, car mechanics, right? And how people think I can work with my hands. I like to build cars. I like to modify or customize cars. A lot of those skill sets, it's amazing. That makes a really great unicorn, honestly, in this smart buildings industry, because we need to get away from people who have this prescribed, this is how we do the maintenance. We walk in, we do this, we do that. We need to get to people who are like, hey, I have this car and this isn't good enough for me, and I want to add a turbocharger, and I want to change the wheels, and I want to, I can't rename it all. I'm not a car person, but that kind of thought process of optimizing, improving, restoring, but also then going that extra step is what we need in the buildings industry. And it's so exciting. I did not go to school thinking I want to be an HVAC, but I had the same experience with I'm not interested in internal combustion engines. I'm not interested in aerospace, and I don't want to design locking mechanisms for the rest of my life. And I kind of fell into this through the Industrial Assessment Center, uh, through the DOE, and I fell in love with it. And then furthermore, after getting into energy engineering, it was the controls and the controls optimization that really spoke to me, because there's so much there and so little talent pool overall that really, really understands that.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Industrial Assessment Center? I don't know that I'm familiar with that. I'm sure some of
Sure.
our listeners aren't either.
Yes. So the Department of Energy, I don't know how they sponsor, they run these industrial assessment centers in various colleges and universities around the nation. I happen to go to Colorado State University. There was an industrial assessment center there, and they employ undergraduate engineers as well as some graduate engineers that are in mechanical engineering, construction management, electrical engineering, similar type fields. Actually, a couple of my colleagues have also come up through the Industrial Assessment Center at their various schools. And what that does is the DOE then funds or helps to offset the cost of small to medium sized industrial energy audits, where we're looking for energy optimization, process optimization, and essentially going in measuring the equipment, the energy waste, the process waste, and then coming up with a report and writing up the energy calculations to justify it and presenting that to these small to medium manufacturing and industrial companies. So I worked from, no, since I went to school in Colorado and there weren't a lot nearby, a lot of other IACs nearby. We were in Montana, we were in Wyoming. We did not tours. We did assessments at gold mines in Elko, Nevada. We did assessments at Devil's Tower Wood Products. We did a talc mine in Montana. We were at a chili plant in New Mexico, and then all over Colorado, like semiconductor clean spaces. It was really fascinating, and learning how to calculate the energy savings or process savings and then present that to a client and then have them actually go implement some of these because they were no brainers really set me off on a really good path to then understand optimizing buildings and energy efficiency and all of the equipment.
I feel like you may have just dropped the hottest tip in this talk to hiring managers. Like, go talk to your industrial assessment centers and find out who those standout students are, because that sounds like an amazing set of experiences to come into the workforce with, way ahead of your cohort.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we've pretty well defined some of the challenges we've seen and why some of these roles are hard to fill and some of the experiences. I think my main thesis here is that, like, we've got to solve this problem. We have to, as a society, as a planet, solve this problem. So I'm going to let myself be optimistic. I'm probably not this optimistic. I'm probably quite cynical, actually. But fast forwarding 10 years, we know we have all these buildings, these cars that don't have turbochargers, that don't have the right wheels. They're, the tires are wore out. We're in trouble. Fast forward 10 years, and let's say 50% of the energy waste in buildings that we all know about, we all talk about every day. Let's say 50% of that is addressed. How do we do that? Who were the people that showed up? How do we get enough, hands in the pie to make that happen?
From my perspective, in terms of the existing buildings, we're really talking operations and maintenance and refining what's there. Because certainly there's a role for new design and a lot of things that are going into that that are likely going to be very successful. But from an operations and maintenance standpoint, as I was mentioning before, I really think it takes engineers, facility engineers, technicians coming together. And what better way to come together than around the true actual data? So, if we're talking about data analysis and we have good platforms, programs to do fault detection and diagnostics, I think we can scale the not the existing workforce. We still need to grow the workforce, but we're going to have to combine that with growing the workforce in order to scale ourselves. The reason I got into analytics and fault detection and diagnostics myself was because I needed to scale that for my business. That was even prior to me coming to Long, and also what Long was seeing and why I came to Long. I can't be the FDD engine, and I can't train up all these people all at once to just be this great FDD engine in their own brains. I can get them there over time. But really, the training tool is the fault detection and diagnostics platform, in my mind. There are other ways to do this, but I really think that fault detection and diagnostics and utilizing that platform helps center the engineers, the technicians, and the facility owners, operators, engineers around a common goal. And it's not finger pointing. It's not, well, you didn't actually fix this, because the data shows for itself when things are fixed, when things are broken, what's wrong. And they provide us this root cause analysis. The good tools out there provide root cause analysis so that you can hit the ground running. Our technicians can prepare after not being at this site for, let's say, 3 months. We're ready to go for our next visit, and we can review the building, review what's going on with it, see the things that are impacting it the most, quantify how much it's impacting it, and make a plan for actually solving the problem while they're on site instead of looking for the problem while they're on site. So I think that that's a big key into how we will have done it uh,
Yeah, yeah, for
in
sure.
however many years. We have to use the tools and the data around us and not just do all the number crunching ourselves.
We've talked a lot about, like, this intersection of an engineer and a technician. On the data side, do you think everyone who's working on, building out some of these tools, making them better, as we get more and more of this stuff deployed, there will be new use cases for that data, I think. Do you think those are folks coming out of the engineering space, or do we have a place for folks who maybe currently, we've talked about this one path where folks maybe are interested in cars and get pulled into engineering, or maybe you're just looking for a good apprenticeship program and get pulled into HVAC technician. For folks who may be going to coding boot camps and building apps right now, I feel like that's another world of people who are like, they want to work with technology already. A lot of those, especially the younger ones, have a desire to have like a impact on the world. And so I think that's another path into this industry. I'm curious where y'all are at on being able to like upskill those folks to understand the buildings well enough to be effective in writing analytics rules or that sort of on the software side.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I know that a couple of our folks at Long have actually come from the IT world themselves. So having the capability to look at things from the IT perspective, we can teach them about buildings. It's really that capability and that intellectual curiosity and the ability to solve problems that we're looking for. And you're right, that could come from the IT world, that could come from the software development world. Obviously, with these FTD platforms, you've got massive software development going on into that. And the user interface is really important because you could have a lot of really smart people writing a lot of really smart rules. But if you can't visualize that and you can't condense it and sort it and filter and understand what you're looking at, you can't use it and you can't go then solve the problem. So I've been really impressed with the FTD platforms out there for how they're coming alongside us.
Yeah, yeah. I think you hit on this that like an important role for FDD. Like we talk about FDD as this like data in, efficiency insights out, but it does feel like a communication platform that is this common ground for the facility operations, the end users, and the engineers supporting them, the technicians. Like that common ground where you have one, like we're all talking about the same thing. It seems to have an
Yes,
immense value. Sort of separate from the like insights or any specific, you're going to save this much energy. It's more like this is what's happening. It's right here. And
yes,
yeah, oh, I see that. It is happening. Whereas a lot of times I've been in those especially during commissioning, you be in those commissioning meetings and it's like that's not really what it's doing. It's doing this. We programmed it to do this. Like, well, I watched it do that. Oh, you didn't see it right. No,
right,
you just get in a loop, right?
exactly.
And so having that, nope, here's the data. The system did this. It shouldn't have done that. It should have done this. Let's talk about how we're going to fix it. Such a much better place to start from.
Yeah, it really is the binder for all of those roles, the client, the service provider, the engineer, and the technician kind of all together talking about that same issue. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So I think one of the things that we talked about at NexusCon, specifically for these service providers, is the business model. I think I said something kind of controversial at that table. I do that occasionally. I say some controversial things. But one of my answers to this, like how are we going to get there, is like we can't get there with the same business model we've been using. Like we can't recruit enough people to sell technician hours to put somebody on site for 8 hours every 4 weeks to just clean up whatever or find things to fix and do PMs and all that stuff. What is your perspective on that? Do we have some new business models that allow this technology to really deliver value in a way that is kind of separate from just selling the same people's time over and over?
I'll say yes and I'm speaking for myself and not necessarily always representing everything at my company because they've got a lot of great ideas and they have a lot of great history in how things have been successful. But I am pushing and I am trying to have these discussions because I agree with you. When you brought that up at NexusCon, I think that's when you and I are both like, oh wow, we see things the same way coming from very different perspectives. I believe that in order to get to that 50% energy savings in 10 years that we're talking about, that we have to
50% of the wasted energy. So 50% of 30% or whatever that number is.
sure.
But yeah, just so
Yes,
people don't think we're out here.
like just saving it all with magic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. I think that we do have to change the business model. And so far, Long has changed the business model inside Long and for our clients, but we've really only taken kind of the initial steps. So now instead of traditional task based, schedule based maintenance, we're doing something more aligned with condition based maintenance. But we're not quite there yet because not all of the buildings have all those sensors and parts and things that we can actually completely do condition-based maintenance. So right now, we're looking at the FDD platform to help us make decisions about what we're going to work on but it's still otherwise very schedule based. Where I see us going and where I'd like to see Long and the whole industry go is that eventually we've got the skill sets and the technicians and all those unicorns that are no longer unicorns because they're just really valuable employees that we've trained up. I see them being more efficient and more effective at implementing these solutions because they understand so deeply what the FDD system is showing the overall building systems are doing. If we can get technicians and engineers agreeing on the solutions, understanding truly what's the resolution of the faults that are coming out of it and of these energy waste, the areas that are wasting energy, then I would like for, Long and all of the companies supporting all of our clients to invest in those people and then basically take on that risk that, hey, we're going to solve your problem. It's going to be outcome based. We know there's an issue. We want to solve this issue. And if we can solve this issue in 2 hours, good for us. If it takes us 16 hours to solve this issue, then maybe we need to rethink how we're doing it, why it took us that long, and really train our staff to do it faster and understand the problem more so that we can be more confident with those estimates. So right now we're kind of on this edge where we want to solve these problems. We're learning how to solve these problems quicker, but we're still kind of in the estimating hours, selling hours, come in and do this on T&M or for a fixed price quote. But I think in order to take it this next step, it can't just be about here's a problem, here's a proposal or a quote, let's come fix it. Because pretty soon all you're doing is, paying the same employees on an hourly basis. And how do you then incentivize those employees that are getting more and more efficient? You've got to sell these services on a different performance based and outcome based solution in order to then pay your technicians and your engineers and whatever combination of that unicorn we're talking about. You need to be able to pay them and retain them and incentivize them for their efficiency. And the only way to do that is to stop just paying them it's not that you don't pay them per hour, but stop charging per hour.
I think that's like the outcome based model for how we service these buildings is super important. Just too many times you get to the end of some sort of scope of work and like the problem's not solved and Susie's going home because that was all the hours that were approved in that scope of work. And so that's obviously not ideal for the client, but I think it's not ideal for the service industries either. I think they're limited. Susie doesn't want to work 80 hours a week. And so they're never going to make more money on Susie than the 45 or 50 hours that Susie's willing to work. And I think there's other models where, hey, you're delivering the same value to the client. It's taking less time. You get to keep some of that upside. The client gets a better experience because the problems are getting resolved better, faster. And you can pay Susie enough to like incentivize her to learn the stuff that you're asking her to learn to use these tools better.
That's kind of where I'm planning to go. Kind of next steps if we have some transition from kind of the updated model that we're using right now that uses FTD and is a great service to that next performance based, not just outcome based, but also performance based.
Right.
And I think I'm drawing on a lot of my years of experience in energy service performance contracting, as well as at a previous company that I worked for, a mechanical company. I actually kind of transitioned what we were selling. We used to sell audits, right? Like there's lots of ASHRAE level 2 audits that people are required to buy, especially in Denver and Washington State and some other places where we have benchmarking requirements and codes and so clients are buying that and that's fine. And I could sell, 20 hours of my time to do an audit and write a report. But what I actually started doing, or when I recognized what the clients were really after, all they actually want is proof, right? Proof is in the pudding. Like let's actually show them that we actually resolve these issues or we actually save them energy. And so you kind of get down this measurement and verification side, and that sounds scary sometimes. You start thinking about guarantees, and there's a lot of risk there, and a lot of companies aren't willing to go down that road. And I understand that there is risk there. And in fact, I think that a lot of the structures of performance contracting are a little bit skewed now because it's really about capital projects, and there's not as much really actually determining whether we've saved a client energy. So at a previous company that I worked for, I started selling something that was I termed it shared optimization savings. So it was driven just based on energy savings, although the whole point was to optimize the way everything worked and therefore get energy savings. And I did have to do some measurement and verification with their utility bills to prove to them I'd saved them energy. And then basically we just shared that split. So it was an infinite ROI for them, and I could determine where I spent my time. If I saw something that like was going to save them a lot of money that I could do quickly, I would do it because I get paid better for that. If I saw something that was really expensive and barely going to save them anything, then maybe I didn't go after that because, that wasn't worth it. So here again, it's performance based. I don't want to necessarily do that going forward. It works. It's fine and I really love a lot about that. But it is time consuming to do a whole lot of that measurement and verification. Well, what if we use fault detection and diagnostics and the comfort scores and the energy scores and the maintenance scores and this third party platform to help show that we've truly improved comfort over time. So maybe there's some sort of base level of minimal cost service for the client, and they get that and they pay for it, and maybe it's per hour. But if we can achieve metrics like, responding within a day to any priority 9 or higher issue, or every 25% increase we get in comfort score over the year, you agree to pay X amount more. Because then we're incentivized to go above and beyond and hit the things that we can that are going to drive those metrics. The client's going to be happier, and we're going to then not feel like we're strapped and we can't go invest the time because we're only getting paid per hour. So those are the kinds of things that I'm considering. I actually hired a statistician, the one that had the car analogy I had the other day. We were talking about how do we use the data we have from the FDD platform and from our company's ERP to start making decisions about, hey, how much time does it take for us to solve chiller plant problems versus VAV problems, and how much are those contributing to the big comfort or energy issues, so that we can start understanding the data and put together a performance-based solution like this, hopefully for the future.
That's awesome. That's really exciting to hear. So I think both the most recent conversation we had, and then with Christina, the previous episode, and then this one, I think both of these are really interesting to newcomers to the industry. I think we're talking a lot about different pathways, places you can plug in, and where I think there's excitement. And what we're talking about is opportunity to get paid more because you're delivering more value. What do you think are dead ends for folks coming into this industry? Like what are things, like, with all this excitement, if you're a newly graduated mechanical engineer or a technician that has, really dove into the understanding the engineering side and the technology side, what are some things that maybe they should look for if they're at a company that maybe is doing this? Maybe they should look to get to another company that's more like Long, that's doing some of these more innovative things. Like what are some of those dead ends you see?
I think that understanding the motivations of upper management is a great place to start. I know those were a lot of the questions that I had when I came to Long. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't pushing a completely uphill battle. I mean, it's hard anyway, right? It's hard in the industry. It's hard in a really good company like Long, who is so well established that we do have a lot of things that we do because we've always done it and because it's always worked. And even with leadership and management, really encouraging this transition and recognizing the need for it, it's still hard, right? We're still fighting the status quo, both internally and externally. So for somebody coming in, I guess like red flags, dead ends, if you've got a company culture of like strict hours or hours based metrics more than performance based, like, yes, you took an hour longer solving it, but you solved all these other problems along the way, and now the client's extremely excited about this, and it's stickier for our clients to want to stay with us. Those are the kinds of things that I would look at. One other thing I would look at, and we didn't really even touch on this. It sounds like your previous podcast you did. Women in the industry, it's an untapped potential. There's a lot of women that probably don't even know how exciting this is and that they could go into this. But I think there's a challenge. Traditionally, with our industry, it's very hours based, and it's you come at 7 and you leave at 4 and you're dispatched, and you have to do, you have to show up then and show up at this client site here. And if you can't start to allow people to schedule themselves or have flexible working hours or be able to work 4 10s or, take off to take their kids to school at a certain time, those flexible hours and those flexible things will help drive more women in the workplace. Not just women though. I know plenty of males and male technicians and people who, maybe they're in a divorce situation and they're sharing custody of kids, and like they've got to take care of their kids too. So you can't just keep traditionally saying, oh, it's the woman's job. I'm lucky. My husband and I both work full time, and we share all the duties, and we have flexible jobs so that we can do that. But I'm not sure I could, be a technician at a lot of companies because I wouldn't have that flexibility. So if we can start to provide more flexibility, more autonomy, at least for the people that are capable of it, these people that are intellectually curious and willing to solve these problems, I think we can get a deeper, richer workforce.
It's really interesting to me as, again, as an outsider, as someone who's not, running a service company or being a technician, but participating in this broader smart buildings kind of dialogue. And the service providers show up to all these conversations and they're like, we just can't hire enough people, blah, 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 blah. We can't hire, we can't hire, we can't hire. There's not enough people. And then like you talk to a technician who works for one of them and they're like, yeah, the hours are long. They don't pay very well. They got mad because my kid got sick and I couldn't show up. You're like, well, maybe there's a reason people don't want to do this. So I think this, like, it's got to change in a lot of different axes. Obviously we need to get more people interested and do a better job communicating why this is exciting work. But there also has to be an adaptation of the roles to be competitive.
You touched on something just now about, I can't show up to work because my kid's sick. With fault detection and diagnostics and with building automation systems, 99% of everything we touch you can do remotely. I'm not saying there isn't a need to go on site and actually fix things, but is there a need today for that particular technician? Or do they have plenty of work digging into the fault detection and diagnostics platform, seeing what's going on at the buildings that they're maybe going to next week, or logging on remotely and fixing some of the problems that we're seeing? I think that we need to start looking at that as more mainstream and not consider that it's only an on site kind of role
Right.
and that it's just ancillary remote work. That'll help that situation as well.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Leslie. This has been a fantastic conversation. I think the information you covered is going to be really helpful, both for folks looking, in roles like yours or in organizations like yours who are looking to kind of what's next, and also again to folks kind of new to the industry looking for an exciting ways to engage and really deliver on some of these values. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, get it recorded, and I think it'll be very useful to folks. Really appreciate you coming out.
Awesome. Thank you for the discussion and for all of your ideas and for bringing me on. It was great. Great talking to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.